We have the tax rate levy hearing for 2021-2022 portion of the meeting. We have an information-only section going on, so I believe this is where we are inviting you all up to share anything that you want to share. For some reason, we have this separated. Come on up. Thank you. Paul Northington and Dan Steinberg are here.
Good evening. This evening we're just going to kind of walk you through the tax rate setting process for this school year, for the FY22 school year. Let me, put it on slides. There we go. Okay, anyway, I will give you some a little bit of background on the setting of the tax rate and the process that goes through that we do each year. Then I'll have Dan come speak to kind of some of the numbers behind the calculation, provide you with some facts, and then at the end, I'll provide you with a recap on some of the highlights for this particular school year. So as we get into the tax rate, setting of the tax rate for this year, the question is, why is it necessary to adjust the tax rate? And depending on the economic situations within the district and the assessed valuation, if the assessed valuation grows greater than either the CPI, which is a Consumer Price Index, or 5%, we get the lesser of the two. This year's CPI is 1.4, so any growth in our tax base through reassessment above 1.4% through the calculation requires us to roll the tax rate ceiling down, and that's the environment that we're in this year. You'll see that as Dan presents the numbers. In years where the increase in our tax base or assessed valuation is below 5% of the CPI, typically the tax rate stays neutral. And in years when the economic situation is in a downturn and property values or assessed valuation is going down, you'll typically see an increase in the tax rate. Again, this year, we're looking at the green section where assessed valuation growth was greater than the CPI, and that consequently will contribute to a lowering of the tax rate, which you'll see. The other part of the tax rate in setting it is a process called recoupment. Basically, each year we set our tax rate based on numbers provided by the county assessor. Oftentimes there's some entities, typically they're commercial entities, that may protest their valuation, and that process may go either at the local level or up to the state tax commission. That process takes the time to get that flushed out. If there's a subsequent ruling made in past years, we're able to recoup the lost revenue based on the fact that we set it with values that were set at the time prior to the adjustment by the State Tax Commission. I will say that our recoupment rate is also going down because we're seeing fewer appeals, number one. And number two, the State Tax Commission has really improved their process for hearing these appeals in a timely manner. So you'll see that our recoupment rate over the past couple of years is also coming down. The recoupment process works in two steps. Basically, when we get notice from the collector and assessor's office that adjustments have been made to return property taxes paid under protest, we go back and recalculate the tax rate for the respective year that it was adjusted, and then we take that recoupment over a 3-year period. And the tax calculation forms and how's this whole process defined? And the simple answer to that is this whole process is highly defined by the State Auditor's Office. The State Auditor's Office provides the forms that we use to calculate it. The tax rates must meet the State Auditor's approval. Typically, when we do our calculations, we'll send it to them for review. After the tax rate hearing is set, after tonight, we will send our forms to the county for them to put on the tax rolls. The county sends that information to the state auditor, and then we'll get a letter from the state auditor here in a few days where they certify our tax rate. So it's a very formal process. That's kind of the process in a quick nutshell. I'm going to have Dan come speak to some of the numbers that really apply to this year. So Dan?
Good evening. So 2021 is a reassessment year, so just a reminder that every odd calendar year is a reassessment year. So the county will go through their process of reevaluating and appraisals for residential and commercial and agricultural properties. So we realized our net assessed valuation went up 330 million this year. So we're at a 4.5 billion is our assessed valuation. So that's about a 7.9% increase. And if we remove out the new construction that came onto our roll, the increase was about 5.9%. So it's compounded by the increase in evaluations of assessments, as well as the new properties and commercial buildings that have been kind of popping up throughout the district. We get credit for that this year as well. So as Paul mentioned, our recoupment rate is over time been going down. So we are seeing a reduction this year of about 4 pennies in our recoupment rate. But we did have about 20 million in settlements that the county reported to us that we are able to recover that, and we typically spread that over 3 years. So we had about 3 pennies that are going to add that will take about 1 penny for the next 3 years. So that's just part of our tax rate that we'll get into the next slide here. So this just shows a comparison of what our tax rate was last year of 4.2985. And then it shows a comparison to what we budgeted, and then our final tax rate, or at least our proposed tax rate that we're presenting tonight, of 4.1252. Overall, it's a 17-cent decrease in our tax rate. So from a budget standpoint, we're right on target with our budget. We're only a variance of about 150,000, and we did experience about 4 million in new revenue this year. So with the new construction that came onto our rolls, with the increase in the assessed valuation, we're able to reflect about a $4 million increase in our operating fund. So for the change in a homeowner, with the change in the tax rate, assuming market value was constant at 250,000, that reflects about an estimated $82 decrease year over year in the tax rates, attributed to the tax rate through Rockwood, because we're just one component of the overall tax rate that you'll see on your tax bills. This is just a summary of the last 8 or 9 years of our assessed valuation. Back in 2013, our total assessed valuation was 3.2 billion. Again, we're at 4.5 billion this year. And our tax rate, as you can see, our high over the last 9 years was back in 2014 of 4.72, and we're down to 4.1252 as our tax rate. And you can see the last 3 reassessment years, we've had approximately 25% increase over the last 6 years in our assessed valuation. So here's our recommended tax rate. You can just shows a comparison as to what it was last year of 4.2985. We're proposing a tax rate running all our calculations through the state auditor's forms of 4.1252, and our assessed revenue of 185.6 million that supports all of our funds. And then a couple of key points. I think Paul's just going to kind of jump back in and just kind of recap it.
Yes, Dan's done a great job working through this whole process and worked a lot with the details. There's a lot of calculations that goes into that, so congratulations to Dan. Just a few final points to really note here. Again, that our tax rate last year decreased by just under a nickel. This year it's going down by 17 cents. So the last 2 years we've seen about a 22-cent decrease in the tax rate. Our debt service rate has remained at 68 cents since 2009, and it stayed at 68 cents for this year. And that fits nicely into our timetable for our debt service levy transition plan. So as we move forward, everything's playing out perfectly in regards to maintaining our AAA rating, staying fiscally strong, and also working very well with our transition from the debt service levy and the capital projects. So it's good to see these things work as scheduled. And then the last thing to really note is one thing that we really monitor closely, and we really talked about this last year due to the uncertainty with COVID, was what was our collection rate going to be? And last year it ended up being a lot stronger than we anticipated when the dust settled. But we, in our budgeting process, have assumed a 97% collection rate, but any variance from that is a big number pretty quick. A 1% drop or a 1% gain is about $1.7 million in revenue. So naturally, it doesn't take much for us to have a budget adjustment if it moves either way, and it can be a large number fairly quickly. I'll open it up to any questions that you may have.
Thank you,
both so
Paul.
much. Thank you so much. That's a lot of information for us to digest. I did want to, my question was going to be about the debt service and why it is staying the same and that we're safe with it doing that.
I didn't hear the last part of that.
The debt service staying the same. And
Yes.
we're safe with it doing that in terms if there are any changes in our revenue because of collection.
Yeah. Actually, the increase in assessed valuation actually helps the debt service rate. If the pennies are staying the same, we're still generating more dollars. So that's certainly a positive for the debt service rate. In our transition plan, we've assumed levels of growth in non-reassessment years and assessment years, and we've been fairly conservative in those estimates. We're very confident in the debt service transition plan that we can transition 18 cents starting next year and have that in place for 4 years and do the second phase of that in 2026. So right now, we're very comfortable with those projections.
Thank you.
So before we get into any other questions real quick, I just want to pause for a second. Janet, we don't have any patrons that are here to speak.
We do not.
Okay. So I'll go ahead and read the motion, and once we get through that, if there are additional questions or comments for Paul or Dan, we can certainly work through any of that. The motion is to adopt the following tax rate levy for the 2021-22 school year. If after validation by the Missouri State Auditor, the tax rate ceiling allowed is less than or greater than the approved rate, the superintendent is hereby authorized to set the final rate for the district as validated by the State of Missouri Auditor. Motion and a second. Thanks for letting me get that in. And if there's any other, no, that's my fault, Tammy. So if there's any other questions or comments, please feel free to share those now.
Is this a typical year, Paul?
I'm sorry, is this a what?
Is this a typical year?
Well, and typically in the fact that it's reassessment years, and typically in reassessment years, Dr. Kinder, we see a higher level of assessed valuation growth, especially in times when the economic settings are favorable. The housing market's strong. We're seeing a lot of commercial growth. So in economic times, yes, this is a pretty typical year. Next year is a non-reassessment year, so typically the assessed valuation growth is more in the 1% range, whereas this year, as Dan pointed out, it was above 7%.
So you reassess every 2 years?
Yes, sir. Every odd year we have reassessment.
All right. If no other comments or questions, then I'll reread the motion. The motion is to adopt the following tax rate levy for the 2021-22 school year. If after validation by the Missouri State Auditor, the tax rate ceiling allowed is less than or greater than the approved rate, the superintendent is hereby authorized to set the final rate for the district as validated by the State of Missouri Auditor. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And that passes.
Thank you.
Thank you both for all of your work on this, especially coming right down to the wire on the 30th here and getting that done tonight. So thank you. All right, next, could I have a motion to go into closed session to discuss personnel?
So move.
Second.
Motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Dr. Kinder?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Miller?
Yes, ma'am.
Mrs. Mondel? Yes. Ms. Romberg?
Yes.
Mrs. Bays?
Yes.
The motion carries.